All right, so let's welcome back to the podcast, Kerry Kincanon from Oregon State University. Kerry, how are you?
I'm doing well, Matt. How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing well. And for those who missed Kerry's interview or you want to listen to it again, Kerry was a guest on episode 55 titled New Ways of Thinking. And now Kerry is back with us as a guest host. So, Kerry, I turn it over to you to introduce your guest.
Excellent, Matt. So I'm so excited to be here today and talk to my friend and Pacific Northwest colleague, Clay Schwenn from the University of Washington. Clay, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you. How are you doing, Kerry?
I'm great. So Clay, hey, I'm going to read your bio and give us a little sense of what you're bringing to the table here in the conversation, and then we'll dive into some questions. So, folks, Clay Schwenn is the Director of Academic Services for the School of Nursing and Health Sciences at the University of Washington Bothell campus. He supports a team of 10 committed academic advisors, field work recruiting and retention managers, program coordinators, and student staff. His advising career started as a peer advisor in the University of Washington Psychology Department after one of his residents, so Clay was a resident advisor, told him about the job and said she thought he'd be perfect for it. That led to a nearly 30-year academic advising career serving University of Washington, several University of Washington programs, and that includes biology, student athlete academic services, undergraduate academic affairs advising, and bioengineering. He joined the Foster School of Business to oversee student leadership programs, and in partnership with capstone faculty, created the Strategic Management Case Competition, which grew to be the largest single-day case competition in the world. Clay's advising philosophy is grounded in nurturing and maintaining meaningful relationships with students and peers, and a passion for synthesizing experiences with them as they dedicate themselves to achieving their goals. Lily Tomlin said, "I always wondered why somebody doesn't do something about that, and then I realized I was somebody. Clay hopes to create somebody's." Love that quote, Clay. In 1997, he attended his first NACADA regional conference and has been involved with NACADA ever since. In 2006, he was the co-creator of the University of Washington Advising podcast, which led over 100 episodes and earned a NACADA Region 8 Best in Region Presentation Award, and then NACADA Outstanding Advising Technology Innovation Certificate of Merit. He has served NACADA as a regular conference proposal reader, a member of the awards selection committee, chair of the Technology and Advising Commission, and is the pre-conference co-chair for the NACADA annual conference being held October 23rd, 26th in Portland, Oregon. So be there, be square, right? We're going to promote that for sure. In 2012, he was recognized with NACADA Region 8 Excellent and Advising and NACADA Global Outstanding Advising Primary Role Awards. And Clay says he's been resting on his laurels ever since, and I know he's kidding about that for sure because he brings it all the time. Outside of University of Washington, Clay is a spouse, a dad, a burn survivor, a Disney fan, and enjoys cooking and cocktails often at the same time. So Clay, what an exciting...
That's all the time we have.
Yeah.
Thanks for tuning in today. So we just got filled up our whole hour with the biography there. So
much to work with there. And I think I wanted to start just by talking about our context. I mean, I think I've known you since the early aughts, right? Probably some early regional conference, and we have some commonalities. I mean, we're at Pacific Northwest research institutions, Pac-12 institutions. We have a longevity at our institutions. So I know you've been UW at various campuses for, like we said, 30 years, and I've been at Oregon State for over 20. And you've had that chance to share your talents with a lot of UW offices and campuses, and that that really piques my interest. I've sort of observed that from afar and really appreciated the trajectory of your career, and so I think that's where I want to start. I know that across the country, a lot of campuses are exploring and implementing career ladders for advisors as a way to retain, talent on their campuses, and particularly those advisors who have advancement aspirations. And I think you have a lot of wisdom to share here in terms of the arc that you've taken with your career. Can you speak a little bit more about your path, maybe starting as a peer advisor and moving into this professional positions, and what has shaped the choices that you've made? What's guided your decision making and sort of transitioning to these different positions over the years?
Sure. So thanks, Kerry. That's a great question to start with, and especially in the context of career ladders, it's something that I think the advising profession overall has evolved its thinking on, and I've seen that evolution. That when I first started in advising in 1992, there was no real discussion of like, well, here's sort of the strategy for building a career, and here are the benchmarks that you might want to reach at 3 years and 5 years and 10 years. And if you sort of evolve over that time, you'll advance from an advisor to a senior advisor to a lead advisor to an assistant director. And so some of that has firmed up a little bit within the field itself. And so if I look at my own career, I really feel like it was having great mentors who were advising me about that exact thing of, here are the types of things that you should be involved in with regard to campus level or departmental service committees. So a couple examples that sort of came to mind. I had, when I was in the biology department, I should probably encapsulate my career a little bit. That I started as a peer advisor in the psychology department my senior year. And then at the end of that year, the person who was the director of the central advising office at the time needed some additional advising help for summer orientations. And so he offered me a 50% position to help out with some orientations. And then I continued as a 50% peer advisor through the summer. And then when I graduated, I ended up kind of filling in for a variety of maternity leaves or long-term care leaves. I sort of just kind of kicked around and said yes to any opportunity, any advising opportunity that came along, and was able to sort of string together a pretty interesting series of 3 to 6 month gigs. And then ended up landing my first full-time permanent position about a year after that, and that was the biology department. I had been filling in for a maternity leave, and then they created a 50% position while I was there, and took that job. So when I think about sort of how did I gain experiences and evolve my career, it was really kind of taking advantage of how to keep things fresh for myself. And so, I had a very sort of undergraduate view of advising and the work that advisors do. And so my supervisor in the biology department ended up putting me on the grad admissions committee. And so I got just a drastically different perspective on how to handle admissions. And I think of that as like a time at which I sort of, my understanding of the university evolved quite a bit. And I really, started to think more clearly about all the different things that the university is really involved in. And so that is when I really started pursuing some outside of advising experiences, like volunteering down at Harborview Medical Center, because the University of Washington has a huge medical system that's attached to it. And becoming more focused on building a lot of different types of experiences that were then going to inform my advising practice, and sort of in the process of trying to persuade a football player that was a biology major to do the honors program, which I had started getting involved with in the biology department. Got to know the advisors in student athlete services, and then when they created a new position because they needed more advising support. The athletic department had grown by quite a bit in terms of the number of students that they were serving, expectations around how much we track student athletes, progress towards the degree, like all of that stuff was really kind of evolving in the mid-90s. There was just a much stronger commitment to graduation. So they created a new advising position, and then they kind of came sniffing around and said, we know you've worked with some of our student athletes, and we think you'd be a good fit for the program. And so that I felt very lucky that opportunity kind of came my way. And so I jumped on it. And again, just as a way to kind of keep things fresh, see a different part of the institution. I think sometimes part of the institution that's held at arm's length by the academic endeavors. So engaging with student athlete academic services, joining them as an academic advisor for 7.5 years is just I think the things that I learned there were so much more about the athletics is a place where the diversity mission of a lot of institutions really lives. And I'm not talking just about race and ethnic diversity, but really access for low income people with really coming from literally all over the world with all kinds of different high school experiences and coming into the university setting. So I think I really learned a lot in athletics about diversity and equity and inclusion and access during that era. And so, I guess I don't know if I'm necessarily getting too much at your question, but I had a fantastic landscape architecture class as an undergraduate, and the professor, he had this quote one time in class, and I just glommed onto it right away. He said, "Never walk past a hole without looking into it." And what I realized is that there were so many different holes to sort of peer into and examine and wonder about at a place that's as rich and diverse as the University of Washington. So when I'm advising new advisors who are early in their career, I always encourage them to sort of look for the skills that you can build to see the institution beyond just your own office. And for me, that was, my involvement with medical center, my involvement with athletics. And it really did lead to a lot of really cool opportunities.
I love that. I love that quote from your class. As you were talking, I was thinking, wow, this sounds like improv. You just sort of yes-anded your way through all these different opportunities at University of Washington, but it's also been the scaffolding process, right, where you've kind of accumulated all this insight and wisdom that's contributed to the next job. And so I was hoping I could tap into that wisdom a little bit, and thinking about that, you've navigated all these different spaces, right? You've worked with student athletes and STEM students and exploring students and business students, and now, health professions. And I imagine the memories and the highlights just come flooding when you think about the span of those different experiences. But what are some of the nuances that have arisen for you working with those different populations, and maybe what are some of the commonalities that you've seen in terms of working with students in those different offices?
Yeah. I've loved working with students so much over the years, because I see college as really a time of like kind of shifting identity, and so if I think about like what are the highlights for me, it's when I'm working with a student and helping them sort of synthesize a new version of themselves. And so, the examples that sort of come to mind are, you can't work in athletics without having a student who has a career-ending injury, like that they've been a gymnast since they were 2 years old. I mean, essentially since they could have walked. And now they are 21 and something, catastrophic has happened to their body, and they cannot be a gymnast anymore. They are no longer that thing that they've been for, 18, 19 years. And they helping that student navigate one of the scariest things in your life. Like, I mean, Kerry, if I told you you're no longer a musician, you no longer can engage with music, right? Like, okay, then what am I, right? And so I have really loved those conversations with students that feel rudderless at times, and um, you're whitewater rafting with them, and you're trying to paddle as fast as you can on one side so that you can kind of help them navigate to sort of a new version of themselves. So yeah, I can very specifically remember, student after student after student that and in big and small ways, right? Like when I worked in pre-major advising, one of the things that I did while I was there was I was backup for the pre-med advisor. And so usually about week 4, week 5 of fall quarter every year, you would just have like 3 days worth of appointments where students had said, were coming in to say, I failed my first chemistry test and I'm not going to be a doctor now. Like, like that's, that one test is now determined the course of their life. And so, it's not even necessarily a matter of sort of building them back up after a failed test. It's really actually, poking a little bit at this idea that, well, are you really not going to be a doctor just because you had one bad test and 4 weeks, 5 weeks into college, and sort of again kind of helping them navigate that change in identity, right? And the and I can think of a lot of students where no, they doubled down and they said, no, that is really part of my identity. That is, so I'm gonna navigate a way forward that enables me to become that doctor I want to be, in spite of the fact that maybe that first quarter chemistry went poorly or something. And similarly, when I worked in the foster school with the leadership programs, really, I was less interested in sort of the mechanics of how students were running their running their student organizations, and far more interested in sort of, how are students who come to the foster school going to be able to incorporate your organization's values into their identity, right? And so, we've got a half dozen different business fraternities, and so how do you help students identify which one goes with them? And so really that process of helping the student leaders like articulate what it means to be a member of Delta Psi versus AK Psi versus any combination of Greek letters that you can imagine. So I really enjoy that process of helping students sort of figure out the future version of themselves.
That's really compelling. I mean, when you think about, again, the diversity of the different spaces that you've worked in, but you've had, it seems like this through line of, regardless of what you're doing, whether you're, direct advising or coordinating a program or directing a unit of team members, at the center of that seems to be identity and development, right? That their growth and their learning and their ability to sort of make meaning of their experiences, which is kind of cool to hear that play out in all of these different spaces. Wow. Yeah. Okay. Well, here, let me.
It's a blast. Like, so, you ask about sort of commonalities and highlights, and it really goes hand in hand together for me. And is probably a reflection of my own experience in college. I came to the University of Washington as a freshman thinking, I'm going to study Russian and major in political science and work on nuclear disarmament, basically take on the Soviet Union, with a job in the State Department. And then, fall of my sophomore year, the Berlin Wall fell and the Soviet Union fell apart. And it was like, oh, okay, well, I'm not that anymore. And thankfully, I had a great undergraduate advisor myself who helped me sort of navigate a way forward to rethink what it is I'm really passionate about. So, yeah.
Wow. Well, hey, let me shift gears for a second. I was, I love that I'm getting you to talk to you in a podcast setting, because I think this is the medium where you made a first strong impression on me. So we mentioned it at the top, that UW advising podcast that you did with Kurt Zeist, and that was kind of the first time that I had heard of, where the medium of podcasting was used as a learning information tool in advising settings. I'm sure that there were probably parallel things going on to what you were doing, but of course, being in Region 8 and sitting in on that presentation, that award-winning presentation that you had, and getting to see what you guys had done, certainly left a mark on me. I wonder if you want to talk a little bit about the genesis of that work back in the day, and maybe put that in the context of what we're doing now, right? I mean, we're on an advising podcast. How do you think educationally focused podcasting has evolved since what you were doing back in 2006, 7-ish?
Yeah. Thanks again. I love the question. I love to get to call out Kurt for his partnership, and we had a really good time with that podcast. Transport yourself back to 2005, 2006, and podcasts weren't really a thing. Like,
right.
I went to, so Kurt and I took that Best in Region presentation to the annual conference that year. And we always started our session with, okay, everybody please stand up. Now, if you've ever listened to a podcast, if you've never listened to a podcast, please sit down. And 3/4 of the room sat down.
Right.
They
Right.
would never listen to a podcast. So, so podcasts are a little more ubiquitous now, but back then, it was a new thing. So I had started listening to a couple very early on podcasts, specifically the Ricky Gervais podcast, and I was like, God, this is such a good medium to sort of broadcast information, and I knew Kurt a little bit. We hadn't really worked together a lot, but one day I was like walking down the hall and I like knocked on his door and I'm like, "Hey, Kurt, I think we should do a podcast, like an advising podcast." And he asked the best possible question uh, in response, which was, "Well, what would it sound like?" And turning that question back and over in our heads, we really thought it should sound like advising. So it should, and so we structured the advising podcast to really be focused on like what's it going to sound like if you come into an advisor's office and ask a question. And so the early podcasts were really focused on kind of information delivery. What does it mean to choose to move to a satisfactory, non-satisfactory grading option? Or, how do I think about putting my schedule together if I'm planning on going to medical school? There, some sort of information delivery things. And I think the later podcasts really got into highlighting student experiences and highlighting, what different students were sort of bringing to the classroom, different opportunities that they might be building. I remember doing like a really great podcast with they'd just founded the undergraduate women in business program. And we had a really, it was just an opportunity to sort of highlight something that we thought was important to the university and a good next step for the institution. So those early podcasts were, me and Kurt in my office really having a conversation where one of us were essentially taking the role of student, one of us take the role of the advisor, and we kind of go back and forth and then edit it down. It was we didn't really have a ton of the like tools that are available now to do a lot of different kinds of podcasts. I mean, we used GarageBand just because it was what was on our Mac that was in our office.
Right.
So your question about sort of how podcasts have evolved and become more innovative, I think the medium has evolved overall, and there are just so many more podcasts out there. So I think really the big challenge is how do you stand out? And I think it truly comes back to that original question that Kurt asked. Well, what will it sound like? And for me, when I've listened to different entertainment podcasts or educational podcasts or true crime podcasts, whatever it might be, like really that focus on kind of the intimacy of the podcast and what it truly sounds like. Like, I think that's that's the through line from 15 years ago.
Yeah, maybe a little more production design intentionality in that is a way to connect with those audiences. I think my next question sort of piggybacks on how it's one of the doors that I think opened up for you with the podcast. I often think of our former Pacific Northwest colleague, Dr. Jennifer Joslin, when
my favorite duck.
Yeah. There's some good ones down there. We like those.
Yeah. We've got some great colleagues at the University of Oregon.
Yeah. So when Dr. Joslin was president, one of her sort of mantras was find your Nikod major to guide your engagement with the association. And I don't know if you would necessarily call it your Nikod major, but the technology piece has been a bit of a through line. I think podcasting probably opened a little bit of that door for you. We talked about some of the leadership roles that you've held related to technology, and I know that you've been a witness to this technological influence over the arc of your career. From your vantage point, what have been some of the key technological game changers in our work over the span of your career? And do you have thoughts on like what's next in relationship to advising and technology over the next decade?
Yeah, predicting the next decade is going to be really, really tough. Yeah. So that would I consider the technology my Nikod major? Yeah, I probably would actually. That it's the thing that I tend to be most interested in and energized by. I think there's been a lot of consolidation in the technology arena, and it's especially interesting being at a university that tends to sort of build it themselves rather than buy stuff off the shelf. So I think that, when I first started as an advisor, you could only log in to the student database from certain terminals. So we had, I had three terminals that I could log into that would allow me to access the student database. And so when we all of a sudden got these little cards that would spit out a random number token, and I could go and log in from a different computer on campus and use my little token to generate that random number that knew it was me. I viewed that as a game changer in 1994, 95 when it first happened, right? And so it's that to me has been sort of the evolution of the technology is advisors aren't advising doesn't just happen in your office anymore, right? It's happening kind of wherever the students are, they can seek advising, and whether they're getting that through a podcast that they're listening to, or a website, or even some of the kind of chat features that are seem really prevalent now. So I think for me, the game changers have really been that students can get the information right when they need it, and answer the question that they're really trying to ask. And I think the advisor's role now is so much more about synthesis and context, and that is what we're really, really great at. And so that's the thing I'm really I love about the technology as it's evolved. I was chair of the Tech in Advising Commission at a time when Facebook was just getting started, and so we had pretty vigorous debates in those commission meetings about the role of social media in academic advising. Should we be quote unquote friends with our students, and what role does that, does that mean that we're trying to actually be friends or not? And so, just some of those conversations early on with regard to social media. And now, it's like every school has a Facebook page and an Instagram and Snapchat and kind of all the other things that go with it. those early conversations were like, God, should we be doing this? And I think if I think about my major being technology, it's that yeah, you just see if it's going to serve the students, and then be committed to making it work for them, and enhance that opportunity to connect and help them synthesize.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, I think, what you're talking about, especially with just all the different choices, there's a democratization about it. So students can find their entry point for getting the information that they need. And, I remember back in the days, we were always, those of us who were really invested in sort of developmental and educationally focused advising were pining for moments where that 30 minutes or 20 minutes or whatever we had with students, we didn't have to deal with any of the prescriptive stuff, or minimize that, and can really, get into the meaning making and the conversations and the types of things that you've referenced as being sort of memorable. And it feels like in some respects where the technology aids and abets that, which is I think a real positive or a plus.
Yeah, I mean, thanks for reflecting that back to me, because it makes me think that one of the big wishes for a generation of advisors was that students would come, like that there was some sort of technology tool that would allow students to kind of plug in potential schedules and see where it would lead them and move things around. And and now, like every school, I think, has some iteration of that, whether they buy it off the shelf or whether they built it themselves. Like there's the planning tools that enable students to tweak class schedules and see potential outcomes, or think about, like, well, can I add a minor, or could I do a double major? Like some of those types of things. I think, I loved it when students would walk in with 3 different schedules and say, like, well, they'd sort of flop them down and say, which one should I do? and then, and rather than sort of me lean in and say, like, well, look, you got chemistry there and biology there, I would inevitably lean back and say, okay, well, tell me what you see are the advantages to each of these, and what are some of the choices that you've made here, so that you can get some insight into sort of what their higher priorities were, what their goals were. So so I love those moments with students, and the technology now just makes that part of it more accessible for students.
Right. So I mentioned in the bio at the top that you're a burn survivor, and I know from past conversations with you and following you on social media that's part of your identity. And I'm curious how, if at all, that shows up in your work with students, whether it's your approach, your philosophy, or even how you help them navigate their journeys.
Yeah, I mean, thanks for asking about that. Yeah, I was burned when I was 4 in a camping accident, and so I've never known any other face looking back at me in the mirror, really. And so I think when I I mentioned that I started working down at Harborview, one of the things I did there was help start a burn survivor peer support group that was funded in part, or at least developed in part, in partnership with a grant through the National Institute on Disability Research and Rehabilitation. And the peer support program, meeting people who have been burned in very different times in their life, made me realize that there are a lot of people who sort of wanted to be put back the way they were. And one person who was on our advisory board, he was the burn survivor, and his wife was also on the board. And she sort of laughed about it much later, but talked about, like, bringing in pictures of him to the doctors from before he'd been burned, and essentially saying, well, here's what he should look like.
Wow.
Like this is, and so that question of, how does that inform my approach or my philosophy? It's that you're having this experience, you've had this experience, and you're not going back, right? Yesterday's version of yourself is gone, and so how are you preparing yourself for the future version of yourself? And so I think that does inform my work with students, is to help them, not sort of mourn the past quite so much, and to really set their eyes to the future of who they want to be, what they want to be. And sure, you can answer questions about, what the career is, or what kind of job, or what kind of grad school. Like those are byproducts of a much stronger vision around, not necessarily, your to-do list, but your to-be list. Like, what do you want to be? And then let the academic components of that serve that bigger vision. So anyway, I think that's a big part of it. I will also say, like, some of the best conversations I've had with students are, ask about their scars, like, I just got back from, I don't know, a week at Disneyland a couple weeks ago, and I have visible scars that people can see, and so I watch people looking at me, and I like it as a door in, like an opportunity, right? To and so when I've had students in my office who've had some sort of scar, hey, what happened there? Like, I call myself a connoisseur of scars. So, and so yes, I'm actually asking about their scars, but I'm also asking about their scars, right?
Yeah, and their story, right?
And their story, and what they're bringing, and asking them to, kind of reveal themselves to me, right? And so I love a good scar story, and hearing students talk about that is a big part of how I like to engage with students.
I really appreciate you, sharing that, Clay, and talking about particularly that notion of helping students navigate change. And, okay, you can't go back to that. We got to move forward. And I think about that from an administrator standpoint too, even as a director. That's one of the things that when you have employees, people who are reporting to you, sometimes you have to move forward. There's a change in place at a big institution, and okay, yes, we used to do it like that, but now we're going to do it like this, and we have to progress and move forward. And so I imagine that you've seen some of that in your time as a leader too.
For sure.
So I could talk all day, but we got a few. I know we're winding down here, so I have a few more questions that I want to put on your plate. So we're on the precipice of NACADA holding its first annual conference in the Pacific Northwest in Seattle back in 1986, well before you and I were in the profession. So we've had the pleasure of serving on the conference planning committee. So give us your commercial. What excites you most about having NACADA come to our backyard?
The Pacific Northwest is one of the most beautiful, most innovative, most forward-thinking, liberal parts of our country and maybe parts of our world. And and so to bring Nikod, an organization that is committed to looking globally, but acting really at an individual level with students and professionals. I think it's just such a great opportunity to be with your people, think carefully about the profession, and be in a room of people who are committed to making your profession better, and by doing that, making you better, not just at your job, but like a better person. And so I just am so excited to have Nikod in Portland, where Portland's one of my favorite cities to go to. It's just infused with a sense of innovation and creativity, and you're surrounded by you know, great food, and like one of the world's largest bookstores. Like, there's like a bookstore that's the size of a city block, and that's a commitment of a city to an institution. And so I think to bring Nikod, this organization that I've been involved with for so long, to a place that really lives its values of innovation and of creativity, I think is completely appropriate, and has been too long in the waiting. So I'm excited to have people from all over the world come to the Pacific Northwest and really realize what a fortunate life we lead here.
Yeah. Me too. I will say me too to that. So, so I'd be remiss if I didn't wrap up with a couple of Disney questions. So, it was in your bio, and you talked about just coming back from Disneyland. So I remember interacting with you back in 2010 in Orlando, where it was at the Coronado Springs. It was at a Disney resort, right? And so I think you had your whole family there, and you either front-ended, like had time at the front end, or on the back end, or maybe both, where you were, going to live it up at Disney World. So my two questions are this. I'm going to start with one. Tell me about a time when your affinity for Disney helped you either in advising a student or working as a coordinator, director, administrator.
So it happened fairly recently, actually. I'd come to University of Washington Bothell from the Seattle campus, and I showed up to a all-school meeting a little bit early, and I noticed that the director of nursing had like a little sticker of the castle at Disneyland on her computer, her laptop. And you have to understand, there are Disney people, and then there are Disney people. and there's always this little dance of like, well, what kind of Disney person are you? And so I was like, oh, I noticed your castle sticker. Have you been to Disneyland lately or something like that? And what I came to realize is that she's a huge Disney fan, and as much as I am. And so what that has done is given us something to connect over, to laugh about, it's just made that relationship more interesting than if I were the director of academic services and she were the director of nursing. Like, right. It adds some complexity and fun to our relationship. And I think there are examples too where students have noticed, like, family pictures, or the fact that I have, a big Oswald the Lucky Rabbit, who was Walt Disney's first character, where he actually created Mickey Mouse. I have a big Oswald in my office, and so it's a good starting point for a conversation for a lot of different kinds of people.
So last question here. So this may be the hardest one though. So across the broad expanse of Disney properties, right? Who are your 2 or 3 favorite characters across the expanse of it?
I mean, that's a really tough one, right? So I guess I would say probably my 2 biggies are Oswald the Lucky Rabbit. I really think his story is interesting. So Walt created him when he was working for Universal. And when he left there, Universal kept that property, kept that character. And so then he had to start from scratch. And that's when he created Mickey Mouse. And so fast forward about 85 years, and Disney still did not have control of that character. And the ABC, Disney owns ABC, and Monday Night Football was moving from ABC to NBC, and NBC wanted to bring Al Michaels from ABC over to NBC, and Disney said, okay, that's great. We will trade you Al Michaels for Oswald the Lucky Rabbit.
Oh my gosh.
And so, and NBC said, what? Because NBC owned Universal. And so, and so, yeah, there ended up being this big trade. And it was, Al Michaels got traded for an 85-year-old cartoon character. The other movie that, or the other kind of property that I just, I think it was such a moment in time, you could never pull it off anymore because of all the different intellectual properties that were involved. But if you take some time and watch Who Framed Roger Rabbit, and you see all of the characters there, whether it was Warner or Universal or Disney, like all these different characters show up in that movie. And I think it was just a kind of a moment of creativity. And a lot of people coming together and saying, yes, let's do this. I really, to this day, still love Who Framed Roger Rabbit and the characters that you see there.
Well, I love us ending on a high note with a reference to an amazing film, and Clay, I'm so grateful that we had a chance to connect today. I think for Nikod Disney fans who are coming to Portland, now Clay is in the know, and you want to seek him out and connect with him there. So so grateful for your wisdom and your thoughts today, and appreciate the chance to spend some time with you. So thanks, Clay.
Kerry, thank you so much. I always love being in a room with you, and I love the conversations that we've been able to have over the years, and this just adds to that. So thank you so much for hosting this today. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely.